Welcome everyone. I'm Luca, PhD student at the Center for Law and Economics at ETH here in Zurich. And I'm super excited today because we have the chance to talk to Professor Ralf Martin. Ralf is an associate professor at Imperial College in London. He also directs the growth program at the Center for Economic Performance at the London School of Economics. According to his website, his research focuses on things that increase economic productivity without compromising the natural environment. And today, we will discuss his recent working paper, Environmental Preferences and Technological Choices. Is market competition clean or dirty? Welcome, Professor Martin. So, before we dive deep into the discussion of the paper, why don't you give us a brief summary of the background of the paper and of the paper itself?
Of course. It looks at climate change, and climate change is an environmental problem, like many other environmental problems, and there's a traditional way of how economists have looked at this. It's that we are basically in a what's sometimes called a prisoner's dilemma. There is pollution, and we all are polluting, and I might not like it, but I cannot deviate from this unless I'm sure that everybody else is not polluting. And so I will continue polluting just because I cannot control everybody else. So we need government intervention to do something about it. We need in the case of carbon prices or some other regulation that makes sure everybody is adhering to the better behavior. And especially at the level of the world, this is very hard to achieve because we don't have a sort of overall world government that could impose and enforce this kind of thing. At the same time, it's clear that this sort of way of analyzing things in economics might not be the only way of how we can look at it. I mean, it's very clear that people are acting what we might call a clean way, even though they are not coerced by any government regulation. So people buy clean electricity, even though they don't have to. People buy electric cars, even if they don't have to. So that means that actually clean is part of what people want, even if there is no regulation. So there are what we sometimes call prosocial preferences. And that has been documented in this kind of thing, but also in smaller things like how you behave with others. You not always try to get one over the other people. There are a lot of experiments that show that people value fairness with respect to their peers, and that's part of having prosocial preferences. So this has been around for a long time. What is new in our paper and that we developed there is that we're integrating a model of this into a model of innovation by companies. And this basically means that companies can respond to these preferences that people may have for prosocial things, for a clean environment and clean products. And then this might influence how they innovate, the kind of innovation investments companies are doing. And then it can determine what we call the direction of innovation. Is the direction of innovation going into making dirty products ever better, or is it starting to go into making clean products better? So that's what we start there, having a model, but then we also have an empirical part where we show then what does this even matter empirically? I mean, we know there are clean companies like Tesla or clean electricity companies, but does this matter very much for the world as a whole? And that's important because you might say, okay, there's some clean people around, so to speak, who like these clean products, but really this won't, do something for the climate as a whole or the environment as a whole, because there's still a lot of people around who don't care for this, and it's not enough to have just a few of them. So we're just gonna take this to the data. We look at companies in the automotive sector and see how they're exposed to different markets where people might have these preferences or might have these preferences to a lesser extent. And we examine their innovation behavior, and we see that there is a sort of a quite strong effect of this on how companies behave.
So, as you mentioned in your paper, you develop a new model. to analyze the impact competition and consumer preferences have on green innovation. You study whether firms invest into more or less polluting technologies. And what is the advantage of your new model compared to the more traditional model where competition lowers prices and low prices induce mass consumption and therefore more pollution?
Well, it introduces a new channel of how firms can respond to these clean preferences. And the competition part is important because once you have these pro-social preferences, which I mentioned before, then developing clean products becomes part of how firms can respond to competition they face. I mean, as you were saying, normally, you might be a bit worried about more competition from a climate point of view, because more competition means, or having no competition means firms don't produce enough. So you might say, oh, now we have more competition, that means firms produce more. And all the people who are worried that what is causing the problem is overconsumption, that's what's causing the climate problem, or that there are a lot of people who think, well, it's bad if we grow, right? So in a way, having more competition means we grow more, we produce more products, we have more pollution. But what we show is once you have these pro-social preferences and integrate them in the model of the firm, then basically becoming clean can become part of what sometimes is called escape competition. You get out of the strong competition, go in a new market where you have less competition, which could be the clean market. And that's basically the new mechanism. And that introduces the possibility that having more competition means less pollution. In fact, what we argue, it's a bit of an inverted U-shaped relationship, right? So if you have just a little bit of an increase, it might mean you actually have more pollution. But if it goes really, if the pro-social preferences are a lot stronger, then more competition means overall a cleaner outcome with less pollution.
Okay, so now we know about the advantages of your model. What are the risks?
The model as such is not a big risk, but the risks might come once we are talking about what sort of are the policy implications, right? So one danger I see is that if governments hear about this, they might conclude, well, it's no longer us that have to do something. It's good enough that consumers have these preferences, and then we go in the right direction. It's all working without having to have strong government policy. But I would argue, the situation is quite urgent. We need to quickly transition the economy from the state we're in at the moment into a clean state. And so we need to have, it's more like a call for using all the tools we have. And, we have spent a lot of time, especially as economists, worrying about carbon prices and recommending carbon prices. But of course, it has rarely happened to the extent we think it should happen, because it's politically often very toxic. Actually, we started writing this paper, when in France you had the Gilets jaunes protests, which was basically a very moderate increase in fuel prices that sparked a massive protest wave all over the country. And of course, in hindsight now, the sort of increases in energy prices we have seen now are nothing compared to what has happened then, or what the government at the time was proposing, which was sort of less than a 10% increase in fuel price. But nevertheless, what we are saying, it's sometimes hard for governments to do something about prices. Here is sort of potentially another lever you can pull. We see that social preferences affect the direction of innovation. Well, social preferences are not sort of happening in a vacuum. They change. Actually, one of the things we see in the paper is that they have changed a lot in the last 20 years. They actually, for a period, social preferences for clean, so to speak, and this is being measured by asking consumers around the world, would you be willing to pay a premium for a clean product? Would you be okay with a carbon tax or something like that? And of course, it's always, it's not the majority who is totally in favor of this, but there's a sizable minority that says, yeah, this is cool and we should do more of this. Anyways, so these things have changed over time, and I think we should be worrying more as governments and economists about what affects these preferences. How can we possibly influence them through education or information? And that in itself can be a mechanism to move forward in situations where maybe we cannot impose as much a carbon price as we would like to, or not as fast as we would like to. And so it's just a different policy lever that we have there.
Interesting. Thank you very much for sharing your research with us today. And maybe to conclude, last question, what do you think are the recommendations for the policymakers, or what policymakers can take from this, and what are areas that require further research?
Well, for the policymakers is what I just said. It offers a new mechanism potentially to affect the transition towards a cleaner economy. But of course, to do that, we need to know a little bit more of what affects preferences of people. I mean, the big surprise of this paper for me was how much the preferences have changed. And we used this variation to show if it made any difference to the innovation behavior of the companies. And we show it does, in a similar order of magnitude as price changes might do. But what we haven't done yet, but what we want to do in the future, and maybe others can do that, is understand better why have the preferences changed that much as they have changed, and what sort of are maybe factors that can help us to change the preferences more into a pro-social direction in various countries.
Thank you again, Professor Martin, for being with us today. We are very much looking forward to your future research. And to all the listeners and viewers, we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did, and hopefully see you next time.